And on that, Carol, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming. We are super excited to have this presentation tonight. We are working with Doctors Reshot and Grafey from the University of Northern Colorado on identifying our culturally and linguistically diverse gifted students. We have a pilot that we're going to be running this spring. So we'll be in schools putting into action these strategies for helping teachers, parents, and administrators identify our kids who we might be missing. And we are just really, really excited to welcome Dr. Grafey and Dr. Reshot tonight.
Okay, thank you. So welcome. This presentation is based on a book that we wrote called Start Seeing and Serving Underserved Gifted Students, but all of the resources and information we put together for you that you will have access to at the end of this presentation. So according to our National Association for Gifted Children, some gifted individuals with exceptional aptitude may not actually demonstrate outstanding levels of achievement all the time. So due to environmental circumstances such as limited opportunities to learn through no fault of their own, as a result of poverty, discrimination, cultural barriers due to physical and learning disabilities. So we need to take special care to identify and nurture the gifted potential in these students. So every day in 100 small ways, our children ask, do you see me? Do you hear me? Do I matter? And our behavior often, or their behavior often reflects our response. And that just means that as educators, families, what we get from children is often based on what we give to children. And so we need to take special care to be sending positive messages and really believe in our children and in our students.
This evening is on students from culturally and linguistically diverse households. So we wanted to make sure that we started by sharing how we were defining CLD. So when we're talking about CLD learners, we're talking about students that are growing up in households that differ in some way from what would be considered mainstream. So from the system normed white, middle to upper class North American household. When we talk about this group of students, it includes, but it's not limited to students whose cultural background and experiences are different from the mainstream culture. It includes a wide variety of underrepresented students as well. So much of what we talk about today, even though we're terming it culturally and linguistically diverse, much of what we talk about is applicable to other groups of underrepresented students as well. Culturally and linguistically diverse students, the way we're defining it for this, also includes students who may be proficient in English, especially the conversational English, but whose primary language at home is not English. Something intriguing to consider, we always like to think about what is it if our students from CLD homes had the opportunity to nominate themselves for accelerated programming, for enrichment programming, for gifted education, what would they say their strengths were? So that's something we're gonna keep coming back to, getting to know your child, what their strengths are, so that you are able to share those with others and validate them in the children yourselves. We're going to spend a little bit of time looking at some charts that have lists of characteristics of gifted students. You're definitely going to see some overlap as we go through a couple of different charts here. As you look at them, we really want you to reflect on what makes sense to you as you think about children with gifts and talents and high potential. But we also want you to think about what the potential issues and problems are with saying this. These characteristics specifically are what we are looking for when we say gifted child. This is what we're looking for in order to recognize gifted children. So I'm not going to read all of them on this list to you, but I'll give you a minute to look at them. It does include things like high levels of motivation, rapid learner, long attention span, unusually large vocabulary, asks probing questions, highly developed curiosity. So I'll give you a minute to just, like I said, look through that and think about what makes sense. What do you recognize in your own child? And what are the potential issues if we say this is a gifted child? This is what we're looking for to identify gifted children in the schools. So I'm going to invite you, if you see anything, if you want to add anything to the chat, you're welcome to do that. We'll take just a couple minutes. If there's anything that you see that you think this could be a problem, this could be an issue as we work to identify gifted learners from underrepresented populations. If you would like to add something, we'll take a couple minutes to do that, and then we'll move on to the next list. Okay, and feel free as we go through the rest of these, if you'd like to comment, you're welcome to do that. So this is a second list of characteristics. This is a list of characteristics put together by Fraser and Passau that, according to the research, these are characteristics that are found in students from all different demographic groups, regardless of their cultural background. So these include strong desire to learn, intense, unusual interests, unusual ability to communicate either with words, numbers, or symbols, effective, often inventive strategies for recognizing and solving problems, large storehouse of information, the ability to grasp new concepts quickly. They have logical approaches to solutions, many highly original ideas, and an unusual sense of humor. So these are characteristics that potentially underlie giftedness in all different cultural backgrounds. One thing to consider as you look at these, definitely characteristics that you probably recognize in your own children to a degree, but I want you to think about how difficult it might be in the school setting to measure these strengths. How do you measure accurately strong desire to learn? So these are things to kind of keep in the back of your mind as we go through some other information in this presentation. And so these last couple lists that we've pulled out, these are characteristics based on research that are more specific potentially to students who have grown up in culturally and linguistically diverse households. The first list we have, these students often express feelings and emotions easily. They improvise with commonplace materials and objects, articulate in role playing and storytelling and different things along those lines. They have a strength in drawing, painting, sculpture, other areas in the arts. They have a strength in music, rhythm, expressiveness with gestures, body language, rich imagery in informal language. So in their language, not necessarily English, but in informal language or in their native language, rich imagery. One thing I actually probably should have started with, as you look at these, it's important to keep in mind that these are generalizations. They are based on research, but this is not going to be true for every gifted child. It may be one or two things that are true, because one of these characteristics is missing in a gifted child does not mean they are not gifted. So it's to give us a general idea. It's important to remember that these are not true of every single child. And so then leading into this last list that I have here that are more specific based on research to students from CLD homes. This list includes being culturally sensitive, taking pride in language and culture, adhering to traditional family responsibilities, preferring collaboration, originality in the arts. They are able to acquire the social English skills quickly, self-confident, positive self-concept. So again, these are characteristics that you may see in these gifted students. We'll probably see in many of them, but you will not see them all in every gifted child. Move out of the characteristics onto other things. A reminder, please keep in mind that the presence of any one of these characteristics, a single one out of this list that we just shared, the view list that we just shared, at the very least, this indicates the need for appropriately differentiated curriculum for experiences to build upon the existing strengths that you are seeing. The characteristics could also be significant indicators of giftedness and should be documented as part of a body of evidence. And one thing that I loved when I was in school was when parents could bring specific examples of things that their children had done. If they could bring things that they created or stories about some of their strengths, it really helped me get to know the child, and it helped with formal identification as well, so we knew better where to look for those strengths, how to develop in different areas with the child, working with the family.
So this is a diagram that's been used to in psychology more to talk about how we communicate with one another, but we like this for just explaining how we see strengths in ourselves, strengths in others. So this is the Johari window concept. So right here in this middle circle is what we call the public self. So this is what others see in me and what I see in myself. So these shared things that we see. Over here, this is what I see in myself, my hidden self that I don't necessarily let other people see. So this could be strengths that I have, for example, or things that I'm concerned about myself, or doubts I have that I just keep to myself. And then over here is what others see in me. So this is my blind self. So this is other things, other people's perceptions that I don't necessarily know, right? This is what other people see that I don't see in myself. And around here is the undiscovered self. So through, development of potential, through these relationships, connections we have with others, through different learning experiences, we become, we take on different, or we have different attributes or different character traits that develop over time. We bring this up because it's important. You're probably already doing the wonderful work of seeing different things in your child. Do they know that you see certain things in them? Or if teachers see certain things in them, are they aware of what those things are? If they're misunderstood or wish that people would see parts of them that they kind of keep to themselves, what are those parts of them? So this is getting to know the whole child and becoming aware of the different strengths, the different things that they possess, so that we can begin to nurture those things. So we want to give you some questions to think about. So some questions to ask yourself as you start to think about what your child's gifts and talents are. So the first set is for you to ask yourself, and the second set of questions is for you to ask your child. And some of these questions, I mean, they may need to think about, they can come up in informal discussion, but I think it's really important to kind of triangulate this information. What are teachers, what are people at school telling you? What is your child feeling? What are you seeing at home, right? In order to put all these pieces together to do what Amy's talking about, where we then can, bring this information to the table and say, hey, these are some wonderful things that I want you to know about, my child. Are you seeing these things in school? And if not, how, can we build on these things? So questions to ask yourself. So what do you think are your child's gifts and talents? And this does not just have to be academic. What do you think are your child's strongest academic subjects? So, and sometimes as parents, we do pay attention and we do try to be involved, but we don't necessarily always know what kind of, what our child's favorite things to do in school are, what their favorite things to like learn are. Sometimes maybe we're a little bit behind in that. For the longest time, if you had asked me about my son, I would have said, you know, reading, he's an avid reader, but my son is identified as a scientist, you know, for years. And for a good part of the time, I didn't even know that. So it's asking those questions, you know, finding out. What do you think your child's strongest interests are and why? Besides some of the obvious things that you see them doing. So you might see them playing video games, or you might see them, you know, doing some other things like that, but what really interests them? What do you think are their strongest character traits and why? This one is extremely important. So in terms of character traits, do you notice that, I mean, they tend to really value fairness, and that comes out, you know, quite a bit, that they tend to take the lead and kind of just like want to steer things and be in control. So what are those character traits that you're noticing are very present in your child? And you may sometimes be like, I don't think those are really good, but actually we can turn most of these character traits we're talking about into something very, very positive. So are there strengths that others see that you don't see? Are there things that, you know, perhaps teachers or somebody at school is telling you about your child that you're like, yeah, I don't really see that at home? What are those things? We shouldn't dismiss them. Are there strengths that you see that others tend not to see, and why do you think that is? So are there things that you're seeing in the home environment that you would say, yeah, I bet you anything, you know, teachers would not say that this is a strength of my child, and why do you think that is? These are questions then you can ask your child. So what do you think makes you unique? Or what do you think makes you special? Or what do you think are your gifts and talents? What do you think are your strongest academic subjects? And then don't ever dismiss this. So hear this and take that in as information and ask why. What are you most interested in and why? What parts of your personality do you like best and why? What are things that make you special that others see that you don't see? So what are things as your family that I'm telling you that you're kind of like, I don't really agree with that. So what are things that make you special that others see that you don't see? And are there special things about you that you wish others would see, that sometimes you feel are a bit invisible to others? And to tell me more about this. So this is not always easy to do, but there are really wonderful surveys out there that can help you get some very good information. One that we really like that's based on lots and lots of research and based out of the positive psychology movement is the VIA character strengths survey. And this is free. You do need to create an account, but they have an adult version and a child version for 10 and under, which helps you identify which are your strongest character personality traits. This could be really interesting just to identify not only in your child, but even in yourself, and to be able to have those conversations about what those traits are and when do you see them and how can you use them in order to, you know, how can you use them in school? How can you use them at home in order to really build on your learning and your relationships? The second one is from Joe Renzulli and Sally Reese out of UConn that we really like, and it's pretty short, but this is just getting at your child's interest really quickly. So this is the If I Ran the School interest inventory, and it's really short just to find out, you know, what are those interests that maybe I do know and some of the ones that I don't know that I should look into a little bit more. And the third, we probably all know about multiple intelligences, or have heard maybe that word used a couple of times. So this is just one that I found, I took myself, that seemed pretty accurate in just determining kind of the 9 different areas where you would fall in terms of how you like to learn best. So again, just another place to get information and to begin those discussions. And we will say that there is a huge resource called a Live Binder at the end of this, where we've compiled resources now for years and updated for families, and everything that we're talking about is in that link that you're going to be given.
We started with characteristics and ways for you to better learn about your child's strengths, because that's really the most important thing, that those strengths are recognized and that we figure out ways to support them, enrich those strengths, help them grow. But we also want to talk about what are some potential barriers. You may see those strengths, teachers may see those strengths, but what are the potential barriers to formal identifications? So to getting that gifted identification within a school setting. We know that the way a child's giftedness shows up may not be what is easily recognized as giftedness in a school setting. For example, a child who has an in-depth, beautiful, complex storytelling ability in her native language, the school may not even know that, may not ever have an opportunity to see that part of the child, may not recognize that as giftedness because it's not showing up as high achievement, which is still what many people think giftedness is. Or they recognize it, but they don't have assessment instruments to actually measure it, to be able to document it as giftedness. I also know that students from CLD homes may face some additional challenges when it comes to formal gifted identification. For example, there may be a lack of opportunity for early exposure to academic experiences, which doesn't mean that these children won't pick up on it quickly once they're exposed, just that they're coming to school without some of this prior knowledge that other students may have. So they're potentially starting out a little bit behind in that area, and it may take longer for them to make up that ground and score high enough on an achievement test or in another area that it could be considered for gifted identification. Another possible challenge is that the enrichment that these children experience in some families is different than what is common for children growing up with stronger influences from the dominant culture, which we'll talk more about that in a minute. And this doesn't mean that their early experiences aren't extremely enriching. It's just that they may not set them up to easily slide into the school culture and have it feel familiar to them. And we know how important it is for students to feel safe and comfortable in their environments in order to succeed. And then I think the other three I kind of covered in my example earlier about the storytelling strengths that aren't necessarily valued the same way within the school day. They're not recognized as indicators of giftedness, or when they are, we're not sure how to accurately measure it. We love the work of Dr. Jean Peterson and wanted to share some of her early work regarding the influence of culture as we talk about dominant culture. So she said the concept of giftedness appears to be bound to context. Each culture sees goodness through its own cultural lens, including the dominant culture, which has its own particular value orientation. You know that school is definitely influenced by what's considered the dominant culture. When you look at school routines, when we look at the need for punctuality, expectations, the content that's taken, the breaks that are given during school, breaks away from school, those are all influenced by what's valued in the dominant culture, so by the dominant culture norms. We also know that the testing that we do in school is very much influenced by dominant cultural norms. The words and concepts that are used in tests are there because typically they are familiar to the dominant culture, which puts those students at an advantage. Tests are typically timed. If time is not something that's valued within the culture, this is very hard to understand. It's hard to wrap their heads around why it would be necessary to time something. And then most tests are individually taken. It's up to one individual person to show what they know rather than a collaboration of what we know together and can do together. So these are just examples of how school is influenced very much by the dominant culture. Some potential differences between what the dominant culture may emphasize as important versus what other cultures may emphasize as important. And just like with characteristics, we want to make it clear that these are generalizations and will not be true in all cases. But some things that many individuals from the dominant culture may emphasize as important are things like IQ scores, achievement, these big displays of ability, achievement, talents, being very verbal, high motivation, that competition with peers, winning is important. And then in a classroom setting, having that back and forth discussion about topics and sharing their opinions openly with other peers and with teachers. So these may be things that are not necessarily valued by other cultures, and in fact may seem to go against what some of the other things are that are valued in cultures other than the mainstream culture. For example, we know that there are certain cultures that in general value much more highly collaboration. They value listening to learn rather than entering into a discussion, that being humble, being selfless, being part of the family, supporting the family, and then providing service to your community are all things that are highly valued in some cultural settings. And again, I want to say that these are generalizations, and there are certainly individuals and families who would be considered from the dominant culture whose values would align much more closely with the list on the right, and vice versa. There are individuals and families from other cultural backgrounds whose values align much more with the mainstream cultures listed on the left. But we just wanted to point out that there are times that the influence of the dominant culture in the school environment sets us up to possibly not fully see the strengths in our high potential and gifted students with varying cultural influences and experiences. I also wanted to touch briefly on the concept of implicit bias as a potential barrier to recognition and identification of giftedness in students from CLD households. I want to start by saying that everyone has implicit biases or these unconscious attitudes and beliefs or stereotypes about some things. Say blonde hair. You see someone with blonde hair and there's this unconscious attitude or belief that you have about individuals with blonde hair that really doesn't have anything to do with that one specific person with blonde hair. It's something that's kind of ingrained that we've learned over time. It doesn't mean that we act on it. And it's different than what we consciously believe when we stop to think about it. We don't necessarily act on these implicit biases, but it's important to know that they are there. And if we're not careful, they're going to impact our interactions. So while we have implicit biases, while that's completely natural for everyone, it's important for educators to work to recognize them, whether they're positive implicit biases or negative implicit biases, that there is that work to recognize them so that they aren't unintentionally negatively impacting students in their classes and schools, so that they're in a position to really see their high potential students from CLD households and from other underserved populations. So just a note on that at times this can be a factor as well in who we're able to successfully identify for gifted services. And we tried to think through some examples of implicit bias that we have witnessed in our time in education. I want to start by saying that the vast majority of the cases when something like this happens, it's because the educator or the administrator is very, very concerned about what's happening. They're trying to do what's right and good for the child and or the family, but the decisions were made possibly without fully considering or understanding the situation. So the decisions were potentially influenced by those attitudes or beliefs that they were not even aware were impacting them. So for one example, we pulled out lack of expectation of family involvement in school. And this is often not because they know anything specific about the family necessarily, but there is this belief that without knowing the family situation, they have a concern about the child, and they make the decision that the school just needs to take care of whatever that concern is on their own without bothering the family, because they assume that the family wouldn't be interested or able for whatever reason, because of a language barrier, job responsibilities, transportation issues. So instead of giving them the family the chance to partner with them on problem solving, they think they're helping by just taking over and trying to solve the problem for the family. Along these same lines, trying to fix a problem or fix what they perceive to be a family issue or family problem with the best of intentions, but again, without stopping to value the expertise and the knowledge that the family has and pull them in and work together, or dismissing concerns. I'll take care of that, I'll fix it, rather than partnering with families to take care of whatever needs to be taken care of. We also wanted to point out that overall, across the nation, there are fewer referrals for gifted education, and there are more referrals for special education and more disciplined referrals for individuals that don't fit necessarily that mainstream cultural vision. That's not exactly the right word, but students that come from homes that are culturally and linguistically diverse, they're not necessarily seen, their strengths are not seen, or things that may challenge them in the school initially, they're seen as being bigger issues than maybe they are. And again, it's typically because these teachers or these administrators, they really, really want to help. They're struggling, let's get them into special education. They're struggling, let's get them into, let's do a discipline referral because they don't understand how to fit into this setting well yet. We don't see the strengths to refer them for gifted education, or more likely what I've seen with teachers is that they worry that they're setting them up for failure. They try to protect them and keep them safe by not including them, not referring them for gifted education, not providing that rich, complex work or the challenge in class. They don't have the access to the AP classes or the honor classes. We don't really work to prepare them to be ready to go to college necessarily, because we want to protect them. Their idea of protection is making sure they have full grasp of the language, or that there are some other things that we want to make sure we do first to keep them safe, rather than putting the focus where it should be, which is on making sure that they have these challenging, enriching experiences, and that we provide them with the appropriate support to be successful with them.
And we know we're running out of time, so we just have a couple more slides, but we just want to show you just how giftedness can look, and it's really based on perceptions. So for student A, the positive perception would be the student's a risk taker in academic endeavors, and they're adventurous in their thinking. For student B, they're a risk taker. They may break rules. They may challenge authority. They may be afraid to challenge others, especially when they feel like they've been wronged or they just have a really strong opinion about something. Both of these are traits of giftedness. They're just how somebody may perceive them based on what their experiences are. So for the second column, that's essentially saying the exact same thing as the first column, but the way the behavior is manifesting may not be perceived as positive by the person who's observing it. So we just want to make sure that we're showing you just some things to be on the lookout for, to really see your whole child in terms of their talents, their potential. And somebody's commenting down here that student A and student B are essentially the same child, right? It's the perception based on who's observing it is what's being changed, okay? So that's what we really want to get across. So again, we may see that the student sticks to the task, gets the job done, doesn't give up easily, even when things are difficult. So that's the positive perception. Or we might see they avoid tending to other things that need to be done because they're not done working on what they focused on, what they've committed to getting done. And this might frustrate the teacher or even parent, right? The person who's watching it. And it may be then perceived as a negative behavior, but it essentially is that persistence, that perseverance that we look for, you know, in our gifted students. So again, just to show you the positive and negative perception. Last one. So deeply interested in many things, loves to learn new things. We always see this as a positive. So this is a positive perception. We might then see on the flip side, indecisive. So may hop from one thing to another without closure in anything. And this appears really random. We want that kid that's like hyper focused. But over here, this still shows interest. This shows a love of learning new things. It just may not be, you know, from our lens, how we positively or how we want to see what a love of interest looks like. So again, just another example. So we shared this with teachers when we did training for Albuquerque Public Schools, and I think a couple of those teachers are here today, which is wonderful. Our educators are here today. But this is also a great tool for parents, and it's included in the resource binder at the end. But this is just to look at some of those traits that we've been talking about, and to see, put down those examples of what you're seeing. And it may be, again, something that may not be perceived positively the way it's coming out, but how are you seeing it? And then there's spaces at the end to take some of these other traits from the presentation and other things that we haven't even talked about and say, this is, you know, after talking to my child, after really thinking about this, these are some things that I'm seeing in my child that I want to bring to the table when I talk to people at school. This is what makes my child unique. This is what I think we can cultivate and turn into really something special at school. So this is just another strategy that you can use just to collect that information and put it in one place for when you have conversations with people at school. And then this is our live binder. So this has just tons of resources. So all the surveys that we talked about, but it also has resources for parenting, resources for underserved gifted learners, if you're worried about underachievement, if you want to help your child with self-advocacy, just anything you can think of. This is a collection of resources that's been in progress for close to a decade. So I hope you will find it useful. And I don't know if you wanted, Maria, and I don't know, did you want to just discuss this just briefly? Okay, thank you. So if you have any questions, I don't know how much time we have, but we will stick around. So that's it. Thank you.
We have a parent question in the chat. If a parent can see gifted behavior, how can they influence the teacher to see the gifted behavior when the teacher may not see it?
Yeah, I'm going to say, just like we talk about persistence as being a gifted trait in kids, persistence in families is also extremely important, and that's not the easiest thing to do. As a parent, I'm a parent, Amy's a parent, you know, I was told when I was trying to get services for my daughter when she was young, well, she never talks, she never asks higher level questions. And I'm like, but my daughter's not going to do that. And there's other ways that we can see giftedness. Within that live binder that I showed you, there's a really wonderful, it's called the 12 traits of giftedness, a non-biased profile that shows you what teachers typically see as the traditional traits of giftedness and then how they might differ in CLD populations. And I think bringing in some of these resources and saying, this is what I'm seeing at home, and guess what? Here's something else that says that this could be how giftedness shows up, is going to create just a really strong foundation for what you're talking about respectfully, you know, with the teacher. I'm going to let you translate that before I say anything else. You can't see the live binder, can you? Is it still the presentation? Okay. Amy, did you want to add to that?
So I agree, and I think the respectful piece is so very important. If you can figure out a way to collaborate with the educators in your building, and I saw a comment, you can seek out the gifted teacher for help. If you can figure out a way to make that about all of us working for this child, you know, here's what I see. What do you see in the classroom? Are we seeing the same types of things? How can we work together to make sure that that we're meeting the needs? What can I do as a parent to help, you know, to help make this a good experience for you and for my child?
You see it now?
Yes.
Okay, so when you go to this resource, for example, when you click on gifted characteristics, these are all tabs of just different resources. So this is the non-biased profile that I mentioned. So everything's collected for you in one place. So anything you'd like to look at is all there. So this is, for example, motivation, and it tells you within special population of students, this is why you might not see it exactly this way. So again, being educated as parents and taking these resources that are wonderful, and going in and saying, okay, so this is what I believe, and here are some other like people that have been doing this for a while that are saying this too. It can be really, really helpful in your advocacy for your child.
I see a couple more comments and I see a hand raised. So I'm going to back up to one of the comments. If you had to prioritize one thing to share with faculty and families, what would you prioritize? For me, the priority is always recognizing those strengths. I mean, we want to be able to formally identify as gifted. That would be ideal. But the most important thing is that we are finding the strengths in kids and we are working together to help them grow. So Jenny, I don't know whether you have a different response, but that's what I would say as far as priority.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, building up that confidence that, you know, in our students, that scholar identity where they see, you know, what they're capable of, and they know that things are not off bounds for them, and really cultivating that, you know, is just so important. And the younger we can do that, it's not that we shouldn't do it when kids are older, but the earlier we start, I think, in building that scholar identity with our children, is incredibly important, because every single child has amazing potential, and we just have to figure out, you know, what the best strategies are to support them and to nurture that.
Yes, you will receive a link to these resources. That was another question in the chat. And then is it Bridget? Do you have a question?
I actually have a comment. So first of all, I'd like to thank you all. This has been valuable information. We did have that parent ask about referring their child. For Albuquerque Public Schools, we do have a referral process, which is through the student assistance team. So they can nominate their child as a parent and say, I want to look into this. So there's a means of getting to an evaluation eventually. So I just wanted to let that parent know about that.
Thank you so much. Any questions in the chat? Is there anything that anyone saw that we need to back up for? Looks like Carol's saying no. Okay.
Well, we thank you so much for spending your evening with us and for being here on behalf of your children. We think that's absolutely wonderful. And we just are very grateful to the team here and to everybody for inviting us. So thank you so much.